Thank you for that reading from Mark chapter 4. That's one of two very familiar passages that I'm going to be preaching on today. The other story that we're looking at is the Old Testament story of David and Goliath that we find in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Well, one of the challenges in preaching is when I come across a verse or an idea, I have to really ask myself, do I believe this? Last Sunday in our sermon, I shared these verses from Psalm 20. Now this I know, the Lord gives victory to his anointed. He answers him from his heavenly sanctuary with the victorious power of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. My sermon title for today is What's Rocking Your Boat? All of us in our lives, in our situations that we live in, come across difficulties and challenges. Some of them could be very overwhelming and challenging. The two stories that we're looking at today, while very familiar to us, are worth looking at again and considering our own experience of faith. The first question I have is this one, is what's rocking your boat? What storm are you presently going through? What difficulty are you facing? What challenge has come your way at this point in your life that's causing you to say and cry out to God, don't you even care? Where are you in the midst of this situation that we're facing? On Wednesday nights, we have something called Wednesday online worship. And on these evenings, people present songs. And one of the songs that was given to us this past week was from Nadine. And it's a powerful song. It's called You Are My Hiding Place. And the words for this song are this, You are my hiding place. You always fill my heart with songs of deliverance. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. Let the weak say, I am strong in the strength of the Lord. It's one thing to sing this song. It's one thing to say these words. And it's quite another thing to live it out, to put it into our experience. And in this story that we have of Jesus and his disciples in Mark chapter 4, we're told that Jesus is traveling with them from one part to another spot, and they're in a boat. And while they're in a boat, a storm comes up that causes the people on this boat to be filled with fear. Look at verse 38 of Mark chapter 4. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And I would imagine their words were even more impactful than that. Don't you even care? Where are you in this situation? Oh, God, why am I going through this right now? It looks like we're going down and there's no hope for us at all. And then we see that Jesus does something that is remarkable and powerful. In verses 39 and 40, it says, Jesus, he got up. He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And these are words that maybe I had them in bold or in yellow on the screen for a reason. Maybe for us to question ourselves. When we are going through a thing in our lives that's rocking our boat, perhaps it's a financial difficulty. Perhaps it's a health crisis. Perhaps it's a relational conflict within your family or within your close circle that you just see no way to get out of it. But do you have faith as a person who trusts in God to be working in this situation? Again, I go back to that verse that we quoted last week from Psalm 20. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. What's rocking your boat? Watch Jesus work and listen for his voice. I have a sense that we need to stop in our own situations. Whatever we're facing, whatever thing that we're going through, we need to stop and remember how Jesus has worked before. And in the midst of the crisis that we're going through, in the midst of the difficulty that you're experiencing, instead of just trying to do more and more and more, watch Jesus work and listen for his voice. In order to listen for the voice of Jesus, we need to be quiet, and we need to pray, and we need to reflect, and we need to think. And it's something that you need to practice and put into a regular routine in your life. I'm impressed by the response of the disciples in verse 41 of Mark 4. They were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." I'm kind of interested that they were terrified when they saw the power of Jesus. But I think sometimes in our lives, we're just terrified by the situations that we go through. Our son or our daughter comes home with a negative report or some challenge that they may be facing, and we don't know how this is going to work out. We hear reports about what's going on with COVID and treatments and vaccines and rollout of plans and Delta variants, and we can be terrified. But again, I think these very familiar stories that we're looking at and considering today makes us stop and watch for Jesus' work and to listen for his voice. Now on the table here today on this blue piece of paper, I have 5 smooth stones that were given to me. Back in 1999, I had the privilege of going to Israel, and I was in the Valley of Elah, and I read the story that we're going to be considering for the rest of our time here this morning, 1 Samuel 17, David and Goliath. And the bus driver came and gave me these stones, these 5 smooth stones, and for 22 years I've carried them around, and they've been in a spot in my office, and I think about them, and I reflect and I remember what God has done. But in this story, we're so familiar with that, I'm afraid you might just tune out today and say, "Oh, I've heard this before, I don't need to listen to it again." I think it's good for us to dig into this story. And the question I have to you today is, what's your personal giant? What's the challenge or difficulty that comes your way that seems to be so overwhelming and difficult? The forces of the army of Israel under Saul's leadership and the Philistines have encamped themselves across this valley of Elah, one group on one side, the other group on the other side, and then this kind of standoff happens. And it goes on for at least 40 days. And in your Bibles, if you look at this won't come up on the screen, but if you look at verses 4 and following, we get a description of what Goliath was like. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out from the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a scan. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was swung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Now, I know what many of you are thinking is like, what's a cubit? And what is a scan? And what is 600 shekels? Well, just to give you a sense, Goliath was big, and he was scary. He was maybe perhaps 9 feet tall, some people kind of value. His spear, the head of his spear weighed some 15 pounds. The shaft on that spear was like a fence post that you would see. He was a big, commanding, overwhelming, scary presence. And we're told in verses 10 and 11 and verse 16 that then the Philistine would come out and he would provoke and he would kind of speak to the people of the army of Israel, and he'd say these words: "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight together." On hearing the Philistines' word, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And in verse 16 it tells us, for 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and every evening and took his stand and said all these aggressive words. What's your personal giant? a persistent, ongoing, and overwhelming challenge that you face. For some of us, it may be our addictions. For some of us, it may be a mental health problem that we struggle with. For some of us, it might be a pressing, oppressive unemployment situation and financial problem that we're going through. We all have these things. We all have these difficulties that we're facing. What's rocking your boat, I ask? What's your personal giant? And what can we take from these stories of old and apply them to our situation today? Well, we're told in 1 Samuel 17 that David was sent by his father to bring some food to his 3 older brothers who were serving there in the army. And he comes up and he hears this commotion that's going on. And David is struck by the words that Goliath is saying, these words of defiance, these words of oppression against the people of Israel. And he just doesn't think it's right. He doesn't like what they're saying and how it's coming across. And he hears the men, all the men of the army of Israel who've gathered there, he hears them talking that King Saul has promised some benefit to the person who would be willing to go out and fight this giant of a man, this giant oppressor. Look at verse 26 of chapter 17. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The question I've asked today in this sermon is, what's rocking your boat? What's your personal giant? And this next one is an important one. What's your faith response to this difficulty that is coming up? Look what David says, these remarkable words in verse 32 of chapter 17. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Now, what was going on in David's thinking that here he is probably a young man at this point? Not a boy, but not a grown man, not a powerful man that looked like he could enter into this battle with this giant. It'd be like me going up to play basketball against LeBron James. I simply wouldn't stand a chance. I would be going down for sure. But David has a sense, because of his faith in God, because of his commitment to the Holy One, that he can't let this challenge go unheeded, unresponded. He cannot not respond to this challenge that's come his way. What's your faith response? Remember your history, anticipate your future. I have a real sense as Saul was interacting with David, saying this is like a lost cause. This boy is going to go and just get wiped out. But David had in his memory times before when, as a shepherd, he had to protect a flock and he went up against the lion or he went up against a bear, and God was with him. And it's important for us to stop in our own situations and remember our past. Remember the blessings that we've had before, and anticipate blessings that will come our way in the future. Look at the response from this giant when David comes out to enter into this battle. The Philistine ridiculed David. "Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick?" And he cursed David by his gods. "Come on," said the Philistine. "I will make roadkill of you for the buzzards. I will turn you into a tasty morsel for field mice." And I wonder what it would have been like for David to be taking those steps from the hill down into the valley to face this challenge. Well, we have a sense of what it was like for him because of the words that we have just in the next verses, in verses 45 and 47. David answered, "You come at me with sword and spear and battle axe. I come at you in the name of the God of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you curse and mock. This very day, God is handing you over to me. I'm about to kill you, cut off your head, and serve up your body and the bodies of your Philistine buddies to the crows and coyotes. And I have this again bold here because it shows something of David's heart. The whole earth will know that there's an extraordinary God in Israel, and everyone gathered here will learn that God doesn't save by means of sword or spear. The battle belongs to God. He's handing you to us on a platter. Again, remembering those words from Psalm 20, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. What's rocking your boat? What's your personal giant? What's your faith response? I have some questions for you to discuss in your groups today, and here's our questions. What's rocking our boat? What's our personal giant? What's our faith response? Now, I know some of you are going to be saying, right, Ross, hold on a minute. These questions aren't very different from the outline that you have given to us in this sermon. And truly, I'm moving from your second person singular to our first person plural response. God has brought us together as a people here at Grace Chapel to do something in response to the troubles that we have around us. Look again at the signs that we have here up at Grace Chapel. Last Sunday I talked about the 215 First Nations children that were found in Kamloops, and we grieve about that. Or the love that we have for our Muslim neighbors. This is something that we have been called as God's people to respond to. The move from your to our says something about the response that we have as the people of God. So how do we as people of God here, Sandeep and Senorita in Bedford, Peter and Robin in Maryland, Ravi in India, Jane in the Bahamas, the Joneses in Timberley, the Zwickers in Tantallon, Bill and Kathy in Coburg. As God has called us together to be His people here at Grace Chapel, how does God want to use us in the situations in the world where there's so much brokenness and difficulty? What's rocking our boat when we think about the ongoing problems with racism, the ongoing problems of poverty in our country? How might we be called as the people of God to respond to these? This past couple of weeks, just a couple months ago actually, Pelham and I took a course that was offered by something called the Chalmers Institute. And the Chalmers Institute helps church mobilize to address issues that they find in their community. And when we think about some of the issues that exist right here in the Clayton Park area of Halifax, God is calling us as His people to make a difference here, to impact this community. But it will require creativity. It will require sacrifice. It will require kind of bravery on our parts to step out of what has been comfortable before, to do and to move into areas where there's much brokenness and difficulty. But I'm excited by it. I'm excited about what kind of leads ahead for us. What's rocking our boat moves us to become the people of God and allows God to work and act through us and do things that we could never, like David, to have accomplished on our own. There's a book that I want to give as a recommendation for you. It's a book by Malcolm Gladwell, David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. It's a really worthwhile read, and I encourage you to listen to it. On Wednesday night, Barb Nanton recommended another song for us. Now, Barb is one of the people who gives leadership to Sunday suppers. And Pelham made the announcement earlier about the need for sandwiches to help feed the poor here in the Halifax area. And here's a very simple way we as the people of God can step into the battle and to do something to bring about change for others. So if you'd like to get involved in the sandwiches, ss@gracechapel.ca and Barb will get in contact with you and give you some direction about that. But Barb gave us a song that the words are very powerful. And we're going to be singing it in just a moment, but I want to just read the first couple of verses of this song. It's from Another in the Fire. There's a grace when the heart is under fire, another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be the same. There was another in the fire standing next to me. There was another in the waters holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden where another died for me. There's another in the fire. And this song will be something that we could reflect on as we think about this sermon and this message today. And it's communicating to us that you are not alone. When we go through difficulties and hardships, we shouldn't be overwhelmed with fear, but we should know that God is present with us. Amen.